Look, man, you can say anything. You can say that aliens came down and took the body. You can say anything, but a possibility is not evidence.
I wanted to ask, you said that the apostles died for their faith, or were willing to die for their faith. Apostles is kind of a nebulous term, so I was going to go by what Sean McDowell, who wrote his doctoral thesis on the apostle martyrdom. And so he said the 11 original disciples, minus Judas, of course, plus Paul would be the apostles. And he says that we can only say with like relative certainty that 4 of them died, and only 2 of them with like accurate certainty. So I was just curious.
Yeah, I agree with Sean. Sean did some great work on that. I think Christians overstate the case when they try and say all 11 died. That's probably true, but we can't confirm all of them.
Well, John didn't die.
What's that?
John didn't die for sure.
Right,
because he was exiled,
yeah. 10 out of the 11, whatever. 11 out of the 12 if you include Paul, right? Okay. But Sean McDowell, who did his PhD research on this, his dissertation said we have really good evidence from the first century for Peter, Paul, and 2 Jameses.
Well, James and the 2 James the son of Zebedee, and James the brother of Jesus, are like a notch lower. They're not on the same level as Peter and Paul.
Okay, right, but there's still good evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think that the evidence is as good for those 2, the 2 Jameses, and so I feel like it's easier to justify why 2 people would die for something they genuinely believe in, whereas the other, and as opposed to like a lot more than that. So I was just curious.
Well, you got to evaluate the evidence for yourself, but what we do know from the ancient world is there is no evidence that anyone ever recanted. And you would think if this was invented, people would be giving up, giving the thing up all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was invented, but I was more curious just because, like, we don't necessarily know if they had the opportunity to recant either.
Well, they were persecuted in general, right? It wasn't just to the death.
I mean,
right? In fact, if you notice, most of the New Testament documents are writing about suffering.
Yeah, that's true. Right? I think, but there were also time periods later on where, like, the persecution went down and like went up and stuff. It wasn't like constant persecution.
Right, it's true, but they could have voted with their feet, right?
True, yeah.
They could have just walked away from the persecution, and they didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
so, I think the case can be overstated.
Yes.
But you can also understate it, which I think what skeptics often do. And again, I would ask them, there's 2 possibilities here. This really happened, or it was invented. I think you have to have a lot more faith to believe it was invented than to believe it really happened.
I mean, I don't necessarily know that it was either invented or...
What's the other option?
I would say people were mistaken, because...
How could they be mistaken about a bodily resurrection where the tomb was known and any production of a body would have squashed the whole thing?
I mean, was the tomb known, though? Because that's not one of, like, Gary Habermas's minimal facts.
Well, Gary will say that at least 75% of scholars admit the empty tomb, okay? Yes. But if anybody started to claim that Jesus had resurrected from the dead, and that creed in 1 Corinthians 15, even Bart Ehrman agrees is within 2 years of the event.
Yeah.
Anybody who wanted to squash Christianity, they could have pulled a skeleton out of that tomb and not even known it was Jesus, and it would have ended Christianity.
But if we didn't know that it was a tomb, like if he was put in a mass grave, then finding a skeleton in a mass grave...
Why think he's put in a mass grave?
I just think that makes the most sense out of the 3 options that we have for what would happen to a crucifixion victim. Or I guess 4 options, my bad.
Why would you think that? There's no evidence that that's the case. Where does the evidence come from?
So, like, obviously his family wouldn't take him because they weren't in high order. And then all we know from the creed is that Jesus was buried. We don't know where he was buried.
Right, but the other testimony we have is that Joseph of Arimathea took him to a tomb that had never been used before, and when they did the excavations under the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that's the kind of tomb they found.
Well, I don't think that the evidence for Joseph of Arimathea is that strong because I think that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, my bad. Man. I totally just blanked on what I was going to say. Joseph of Arimathea is part of the word of the Jewish leader people.
Yeah, he's a member of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, and
which, by the way, is another embarrassing detail. Why would anybody inventing this story say that a guy who sentenced Jesus to die turned out to be a good guy, while the disciples who followed Jesus ran away?
Well, because I think people were trying to establish that there was an empty tomb, so you would have to figure out how he got into a tomb.
But why would they want to establish an empty tomb? To get themselves beaten, tortured, and killed?
Well, because they wanted to be able to prove that Jesus was resurrected.
Why?
Because they wanted to continue the belief.
Why?
I don't know. Why not?
Look, man, you can say anything. You can say that aliens came down and took the body. You can say anything, but a possibility is not evidence.
Yes.
You need evidence for what you say, and all the evidence is on the side that Jesus rose from the dead. You can speculate any way you want, and you can believe that.
Yeah.
But if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
So I was thinking about this while you were talking.
It's yes or no.
Well, so my thing is, like,
No.
you
Okay,
believe
got
that
it.
you believe Christianity is
got
true.
it. Go ahead.
You believe that Christianity is true, and so for me, like, if Christianity is true in the way that it's true for you, then probably not, because I'm not. But if it was true
Wait,
to
true?
me,
What do you mean true for me? What does that mean?
well, like, you believe it because you see evidence and
Yeah.
you evaluate that evidence and you think that it's true. So if I evaluated the evidence and believed that it was true, then I would believe it. Is my point. I would say yes. I'll just simplify it. Yes, I would. If it was true,
Okay, so if I gave you a book, would you read it?
probably yes.
No, not probably.
Yes, I would read it. I have a long reading list, but I would eventually get to it. I promise.
Give him a book, would you? Thank you.